Presidents stand behind podiums. Generals wear stars on their shoulders. We expect authority to announce itself, to operate in the daylight from official buildings where we can see it. But power doesn't always need an office to rule. For much of the 20th century, an entirely different kind of system governed parts of America. It held no elections and drafted no legal constitution. Instead, this shadow authority built its foundation on four strict pillars: money, loyalty, fear, and absolute silence. To understand how a collection of neighborhood gangs organized themselves into a hidden civilization capable of challenging the American government, we have to look at how they started. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, American cities expanded at a blistering pace. Industrialization packed people into densely crowded neighborhoods where economic inequality defined daily life. Millions of immigrants arrived looking for work, only to find themselves completely cut off from political representation or social safety nets. When the state fails to provide protection or opportunity, something else inevitably fills the void. Unofficial networks formed on the streets to resolve disputes and secure basic survival, operating entirely outside the boundaries of the law. The criminal syndicates that followed weren't an accident. They were cultivated in the blind spots of a rapidly growing nation. Then, in 1920, the United States government initiated an ambitious social experiment, legally banning the manufacture and sale of alcohol nationwide. The policy successfully erased the legal supply of liquor, but the public demand remained exactly the same. Almost overnight, a massive black market materialized. Local gangs quickly recognized the financial opportunity. They scaled up their operations, stockpiling enormous quantities of liquor to quench a thirsty nation. Controlling this illicit supply chain generated a tidal wave of cash. Bootlegging provided these criminal networks with tax-free revenue on a scale they had never seen before. By trying to legislate morality, the government accidentally handed street-level criminals the unlimited treasury they needed to build a true empire. Infused with this new capital, criminal factions stopped worrying about mere neighborhood survival and started planning for strategic dominance across the country. They organized operations like modern businesses. Cities were carved into strict territories, profits meticulously tracked, and chains of command established. To stop factions from destroying profits through endless wars, they formed a high-level commission, a board of directors regulating the underworld. By applying calculated logic to illegal enterprises, the mafia successfully replicated the structure of corporate America. Accumulating vast wealth provided a foundation, but governing an illegal empire required a ruthless and effective method of social control. While physical violence was a tool, the threat of violence was the actual foundation. Fear leaves a lasting psychological impact, paralyzing thousands of people long after a single violent act is committed. This fear was codified into a cultural absolute known as omerta, a strict vow of silence. Omerta functioned as a two-way shield. Inside the organization, it guaranteed secrecy and loyalty among members. Outside, it projected enough terror to ensure that regular citizens and witnesses would never speak to the police. Protected by weaponized fear and community silence, these syndicates operated almost entirely beyond the reach of the American justice system. As their treasury expanded, their ambitions grew. The profits from the underworld soon spilled over into the legitimate daylight economy. Syndicates deployed millions of dollars in bribes to compromise public officials, actively purchasing political immunity and stalling federal investigations before they could even begin. They aggressively infiltrated legitimate industries, focusing specifically on seizing control of massive American labor unions. By commanding the labor forces and supply chains, these organizations gained the leverage to dictate shipping routes, manipulate construction projects, and directly throttle city infrastructure. They had evolved from a scattered network of bootleggers into a parasitic state, firmly embedded within the machinery of the nation. History clearly shows that when any empire expands far too aggressively, it inevitably draws the coordinated wrath of its rivals. The federal government finally mounted a unified counteroffensive. Law enforcement modernized, utilizing dedicated task forces and advanced electronic surveillance to map the criminal networks. But the fatal blow came from within. Under crushing pressure from lengthy prison sentences, the psychological armor of omerta fractured. High-level insiders began breaking their oaths and cooperating with prosecutors. These betrayals triggered a massive domino effect. Without the protection of total secrecy, investigators could clearly see the hidden leadership structure and systematically dismantle it. The organization was stripped of its greatest defense. It fell because its invisibility was finally dragged into the light. Even decades later, the American Mafia holds a firm grip on our cultural imagination. It captures our attention because it successfully fused the essential tools of national governance, wealth, force, and strict internal laws into an entirely rogue system. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Supreme power doesn't always reside in marble capitals. Sometimes it thrives in the shadows, though it can only survive as long as it remains completely unseen. The traditional families eventually faded from dominance, but their blueprint for building an illicit empire was soon adopted by a much larger threat. International cartels emerged on a global scale, funded not by neighborhood liquor sales, but by an endless wave of narcotics, creating networks wealthy enough to challenge sovereign nations.